curious, to whom do you think are the winners and losers in your field, or in teacher ed, which is my field, and how might this notion of fairness play out? We try to be fair in policy, we try to be fair in practice, but are we perpetuating this idea of winners and losers in our attempts within our culturally situated context to be fair? So that's my question that I hope we'll have a chance to talk about later.
Thank you, David. Next we have Tamuli.
Afternoon, everybody. I was tempted to give that Tamuli. Thank you. You like me. You really like me. This is my name. I'm going to accept my award. I do teacher prep at the University of Connecticut. I co-lead a faculty learning community that's trying to help a number of us who prepare teachers understand the nature of linguistic and cultural diversity and prepare teachers for those kinds of diversity when they hit schools. I'm also a social studies teacher educator. And coming out of that background, to me, fairness feels like the effort to make school work for all people, for all kinds of human difference that we understand. That means also to make individual classrooms work in that way. Universal design is a principle that says we know how. There's a principle that says we can find ways to make products or buildings or environments work for many different kinds of human difference. And so when you walk into a school building now compared to 100 years ago, and you see where once there were only stairs, you'll find in some places a ramp or an elevator. To us, it's obvious that we've just given access to a child in a wheelchair. That child now goes to a music classroom or science lab. They have the chance to realize their potential as a learner of music or science. It's very easy to feel or see what it means to change the structure of a building. But for other kinds of human difference, it's not going to be as simple as a physical alteration to the building. So if we want to make a universally designed, a universally accessible classroom or school building for other kinds of difference, where would you start? And often I think you have to start with policy, or you have to start with what's in the stakeholders' heads. Our heads as researchers, principals, school psychologists, teachers, all the staff. What are the conceptions, the values, the knowledge that they bring to their work? A place that any of us could start, I think, is the hard work of decentering ourselves. So I don't know about you, but there are days when I wake up and I think the world is like me. The way I was raised, the language my parents used, how we celebrated Christmas, and it was Christmas, all that's the norm. That's the norm, or that's even the good way to do it. And I've been lucky to be married to a woman who grew up in Korea, and to spend time now in China and Korea, and to be decentered, to have my universe not be the center or the right way to do it, but to be forced to recognize that diversity is the norm. Our country's lucky that as we grow more linguistically and culturally diverse, it just becomes more obvious that our teachers need to understand that, of course, diversity is the norm. To the extent that any one of us, teachers, principals, researchers, in some ways are part of the mainstream or the majority, we can start to get off the center, decenter, and recognize that universal design makes sense when you recognize that all of us are differently abled. All of us come from a culture speaking first language that may be different in places from each other. All of us have sexual orientation. And that's not to try and be blind to the fact that there are majority first languages, and that's the language of instruction, and that matters. That's not to be blind to difference. It's not to be blind to the potential opportunities or oppressions that come with all of these differences. But that's to say, if all future principals or teachers start with that expectation, we design our instruction in our classrooms and our school buildings, and the messages we send by what's up on walls, the people we hire, to try and recognize that diversity is the norm. We come out, I think, with the right starting place, and then we do the hard work, which is, so then what do we need to learn? What do we need to change? What is it that teachers or principals need to act on, to value, to attend to? So I'll just close by noting my dilemma in this. I desperately want the 15-year-old girl who believes she's lesbian to have resources in her library and resources in the counselor's head, or enough training with her teachers so that the teachers will, if not know quite how to support, not undermine that student in their journey towards making sense of what's very hard. And simultaneously, I want the 15-year-old daughter of a traditional Catholic family. A Catholic family that desperately does not want the school to be intruding on what they feel like is their right. To be alienated, for the family to be alienated. Now, I personally will pick sides in that battle if I have to pick, but I don't think you should have to pick. But at some point at which it's easy to have this happy image of being fair to all people, welcoming to all people, creating opportunities for education for all people, but we live in a contested society regarding the outcomes of education, what counts as education, what our schools should be doing, and it should be that way. We should be in a society where, in fact, we have these open disagreements, and part of the work of fairness is not to solve the problems, but to be constantly in dialogue, doing our best to meet all students' needs, all families' needs, be welcoming so that all students have the opportunity to realize their potential. So I guess my dilemma and my suggestion is, it's the act, not a final destination, that's fairness.
Thank you, Tom. And now, Thanos Patelis.
Steve said he would throw me off the stage if I go over 3 minutes, so I'm going to go down the stage. Okay, so I'm Thanos Patelis. I'm with the Center for Assessment, and I will talk about fairness in higher education assessment. Kristen went out to first dibs on K-12 assessment, so I figured I'd go with the other side. But this, what I'm going to say, applies to, I think, other things. All this is going to be influenced by Sam Messick and what I have learned from his work, and what is happening now in terms of some ways of looking at fairness as it affects, as it comes from in using measurement aspects. So I want to read some of this, so I put it there for you to also look at. Equity and fairness are social values that apply whenever decisions are made or actions taken that affect individuals or groups. If these decisions are based on test scores or assessment information in general, then equity and fairness become central measurement concerns that fall in the area of validity. So I'm also contesting, as the way Sam has, and submitting to you, that validity is also a social value. There are many technical aspects to validity, and we've been bored by those lectures, but there are technical aspects that are embedded in psychometric theory. And we shouldn't, and we cannot permit the technical aspects to obscure the fact that validity is born and realized in social values. So validating cutoffs is a judgment where you want to avoid making errors. And these errors are selecting someone who is likely to fail, or not selecting someone who would have succeeded. And this is sort of a traditional paradigm, particularly in the admissions process of selecting students who are going to post-secondary institution. And so if you look at test grades versus the ultimate outcome, where you set that cutoff is going to determine the extent to which you have false positives and false negatives. So here are two examples, E and G, of setting these cutoffs based on values of, do you need to get people into the program in order to, because you value access, because if you don't, you will lose them forever. If it's at-risk population, you need to get into a program. Or do you set the cutoff higher, where G is, in order to ensure that they're going to be successful, because if they're not, potentially they're so fragile and they don't do well, you would then have lost them forever. So I'm submitting that where one sets these cutoffs and then evaluates the impact will reflect a value statement of what type of error is more important to avoid. And that is not a technical issue. I quote Messick, and I'll read this quickly. In recent years, the concept of, and this is sort of trying to preach to those who don't believe in this, or who are losing faith in this topic. Steve, I think, is with this. So, in recent years, the concept of validity has been extended to encompass the adequacy and appropriateness of interpretations and actions based on test scores or other assessment devices. The term adequacy refers to the evidential basis of validity and appropriateness to the consequential basis. So equity and fairness are key issues with respect to the consequential basis of validity because they can ultimately be evaluated only taking the intended and unintended consequences of a test, interpretation, and use into account. Without this important aspect of validity, equity, and fairness, as I've suggested, cannot be assessed. So last comment. Equity and fairness are principles of social justice and closely linked to what I'm arguing and Sam Messick, what I learned from Sam Messick in his argument, a consequential basis of validity. In the context of educational assessment, the major issues of equity are, and echoing what Kristen had just said, equal access, equal treatment, and equal opportunity to learn. The major concern of fairness to achieve proper balance of the needs, rights, and demands of different individuals and groups in test interpretation and use. And so I leave you with something concrete, that the relevant validity principle in establishing fairness is comparability. Comparability across diverse individuals, groups, and settings involving scoring, interpretation, and ultimately the use of these scores. Thank you.
Wow, you did it. Can't believe that worked. So as promised, now we're going to open up to the audience. And by the way, I think all presentations should now be 3 to 5 minutes, because that was really great. So who wants to go first? I'll walk the microphone down. Questions? Yes.
Okay, here's my concern.
Have them introduce.
My name's Michael Wilson. I work at Western Connecticut State University. My concern is this. We have tools, and my sense of fairness is people being able to sort of actualize and fulfill whatever potential they have available. But we have a lot of, we have a great deal of testing involved in this process, especially with respect to education. And I wonder, I've been thinking in terms of Sam Messick and this consequential evidence of how this stuff is working. My concern is that what are we doing with testing, and what kind of impact is it having on the consequences of its use? And what I'm thinking about is, I think it's Carol Dweck's work in which she considers the fact that too many people are all involved in ability. And is ability something that we're really pushing with testing, when we should in fact be pushing something more in terms of effort? I mean, that's so. How is that being playing on our? How do you think that in response to my concern, how is that having an impact on fairness?
I'll take a shot at addressing what, I don't know, 10% of your question. I don't know how to quantify it, but we talk a lot about Dweck's work in New York State and have integrated her model into a lot of our professional development for teachers because it drives right at the heart of the social justice paradigm in which we're working. Because if it's kind of like the old-fashioned view, the more psychological view that ability is something, innate intelligence that you're born with, you're either smart or you're not, and how that kind of shapes your own self reflections and your effort. This is kind of what Dweck wants to challenge our thinking about. We need teachers to understand that sometimes a lack of effort is because of how a student has been viewed and categorized and basically held to very low expectations. So in our language around assessment in New York, we very consciously do not use terms like ability. We talk about achievement, and we without exception, believe that every student can have high levels of achievement and self-actualization.
But to the extent that we push testing, are we pushing the ability notion?
I do not think so. I do not think that having assessments as part of the educational experience is anti-DWEC.
I'm going to try to just respond, and you may not like this, but there was some wisdom, or the wisdom behind, the motivation behind a generalized reasoning test that made its way into what we call the SAT, and not so much the ACT, but there are any college entrance exam that looks at generalized reasoning ability, was out of the need for fairness, believe it or not, at that time. The reason for it was that students who did well on achievement tests had the opportunities to learn, were taking the right courses, and the effort to introduce ability tests, so-called, or generalized reasoning tests, which is probably a more accurate term, that is not innate, but could be, but is also a function of developed abilities over various experiences. It's not tied to the specific courses that students take or are unable to take because they haven't gotten the opportunity, and to try to measure something that is course and not course specific to level the playing field in terms of, in the SAT's case, the college admissions process. So that was the intention behind it, was an effort to balance, level the playing field for students who did not have opportunities to take specific courses, which are highly correlated, especially if they're done right and there's a series of experiences with doing really well on those types of tests.
Hello? If you look at everything that's happened in educational assessment policy in the past 20 years, it's totally incongruous with the idea that ability is innate. So states asked to develop statewide curriculum frameworks with proficiency metrics set on that, and then students being judged with whether respect they're proficient. And the whole idea of all children being proficient by 2014, obviously that's saying that we're setting goals that we think children can meet, not that some are innately able to do it and some aren't. So I think that's a very kind of like norm reference perspective, and I think we've really gotten away from that to more criterion reference perspective, and I think that's a good improvement. Yeah.
Can I have one more comment? I think you're also touching upon another 10% of your really packed comment and question is what are we measuring, and is that important?
Right.
Are we measuring the right things for whatever purpose you have in mind? And so the idea of going into not just what you've learned or what your potential is in learning, but also how much effort do you expend, can you expend? Topics like perseverance, working hard, knowing where to find information, time management, self-management, metacognitive strategies. Those are areas that I think folks are looking into if we're going to measure, we should try to measure more of things that are traditionally been difficult to measure, but maybe are more important to include in some of the information we get about individuals.
Thank you for starting us off with a great question. Let's take another one. Yeah.
Both traditional assessment grades, right, and standardized assessment scores produce a singular report, a singular mark for each student. What are the implications of this very old paradigm for fairness? Producing a almost unidimensional, often unidimensional report on student learning from what is, I would think, a rather complex array of millennials.
Welcome to NERA. Good to see you. Yeah, introduce yourself, please.
I'm Alex Hoffman. Sometimes. I'm Alex Hoffman. I'm finishing up my doctorate at Teachers College, and I right now am a consultant.
So I'll take the first shot at it. Alex, I can't wait until we have computer adaptive assessments that allow students to do mostly performance-based tasks that we can report out on a multi-dimensional IRT model, and also incorporate their responses into, on attitude and behavioral measures like Annis was talking about. Because you're right. I mean, and Barbara was just writing a note to me, and kind of, she had a different interpretation of your question. I think might have been more spot on. But because we have to build assessments for different purposes, it does kind of box us in a bit. So when we build an assessment whose primary purpose is to reliably classify students into a performance category, we then become very limited in the amount of information that we can provide back to parents and educators about their knowledge and skills, their weaknesses, their strengths. And this is why it is so critically important for folks like David and Tom to make sure that they are training educators to have balanced assessment systems where they are taking their students' temperature the entire time the students are in the classroom through as part of their instructional choices, whether it's through a formative assessment approach that is just a dialogue between teacher and student, that is daily exit cards, that are weekly assignments, through multi-week assignments that where a teacher can see a student grow and learn through the teacher's feedback to the student on their project. So this is why the question you asked. This is why a balanced assessment system is necessary. Even when we do have these assessments that I dream of in the future, we're still going to need that other component. Colleagues?
Yeah, there seems to me, I think it's a great question, and one that I would have posed if sitting out and looking back. Which I'd much rather be doing, given the nature of the question. There's, to say there's general discontent among teachers would be a dramatic understatement when you would bring the word testing or measurement. And I think organizations like NERA, and I'm not a testing measurement person, you probably figured that out. I bring cookies, not PowerPoints, to my presentations.
I bring nerves.
But what's so interesting to me is within sort of the professional and academic, collegial sort of conference setting, I hear a lot of discourse about what doesn't work, how we want to make it better, some of the nuance of how we set. But when I get out to the real world, I don't hear a lot of folks from our professions, in my view, sort of being as direct and honest, and I'm not suggesting dishonesty, I guess I'm suggesting not communicative with regard to some of the limitations of what we're doing. And so that leads to discontent among teachers who I think do live day to day this nuance and do see many, many limitations in things we're trying to do. And then through their students onto families and communities, it just seems to me we could be in a closer sort of circle of feedback and communication, so that folks understand where we've come from. And I learned some things just in the last 10 minutes about where we've come from. Clearly about where we're at, which I would argue is not a great place. out in the real world. But then I hear folks literally who are leading the profession who have vision for where we'd like to go. And that does give me a sense of hope that we are in sort of a transition period from sort of older models of thinking of learning and assessment in a period, and I think you would agree, a rapid period of growth and development and understanding toward what I know everybody in this room, given the presentations over our conference, we're working towards something better. But I don't hear those messages, and I think they could go a long way to help, if not eliminate, at least manage some of that discontent among the teacher professional workforce, and then educate communities and parents about those scores. And I've got a kid, I've got a 9-year-old boy at home, and he went through his first round of standardized assessments last year. Very interesting, right? Been doing this 25 years, teaching and learning, and this was my first time when I got the envelope from the state of Connecticut, and I tore the envelope opening, and I found myself sort of shockingly interested. Because the theory of it was, I'm not going to care when those scores come. I've been one of those. I'm not sure that says anything about my child. And yet I was tearing that envelope open to see what it says. And that's that honest recognition is there's something there. And when I looked at those scores, when I was looking at those scores, well, we decided, do we share them with our child? And my partner, who's not in the profession, laundry list of questions came cascading out, and that to me helped realize, boy, there's just a lot. Boy, everybody gets these letters, and not everybody has an expert at the kitchen table that can help folks make sense of that singular, unidimensional rating of their child.
But grades are doing the exact same thing, aren't they? I'm not saying test versus grades. I'm saying that school grades are also a single measure at the end. And so testing grades have this, the standardized test and our transcript have this in common. So then what is the implication of that for fairness?
Yeah, I would argue report cards are more holistic, at least in the many districts I work with. They do offer effort scores. They offer, granted, they're snapshots, and in many ways not the ideal, but I do think they paint a broader picture of a child's development than some other measures that parents might be receiving.
Let me offer Barbara a chance to respond.
Oh. Well, I think the issue that I have is that what I had said to Kristen is, what is the purpose? But really, what can the teacher do with what they get? We administer, hopefully teachers are administering formative assessments throughout the year to track how the kids are doing, knowing that the children are all different. They come from different places in their head and everywhere else. And so that's one side. And then they take a state test. And very often when we're doing research, when we're doing evaluation, what's the easiest thing to look at? Send us your state test scores. And I'll just give you years ago I was working in California on a project, and we gathered the state test data in this district and we analyzed it, and we were looking at individual schools, elementary schools as it happened. And we did a lot of surveys to parents, to teachers, even to older kids. And in this particular school, the parents thought this school was just absolutely fabulous. Their kids were doing really well, and they loved it. Test scores in the other room. And we said, what is going on here? So we went and got their kids' report cards. Well, the teachers were giving the kids, nobody got a little B. And the parents were saying, I believe the teacher. I believe that what they're saying about my child, forget the state test. doesn't mean anything. So it puts you in that situation of what are they looking at? And I think that we need to look a little bit more purposefully at these things. And so on the one hand, you have